Good morning. My name is Sarah Dockery-Sparks. I'm the education research reporter at Education Week. And we're going to be talking about two things that people might not think of as innovations because they're classics in education reform. Both school time and class size have been being debated since the Tennessee Star study and before, probably. But they've taken on a more urgent note lately, in part because most states at this point have relaxed their class size restrictions, and also because the federal pressure now is on trying to expand learning time in as many ways as possible. We've seen that in the innovations, investing in innovation grants as well as the Race to the Top grants. So we're really trying to get a handle on not just the black and white issues of more time, less time, more kids in a class, less kids in a class, fewer kids in a class, but how can we really leverage these into deeper understanding for the students, as well as better time management and better staff allocation for our teachers and other administrators. And with us to discuss this today are my three panelists. Starting on the far right is Peter Gorman, back again, from Charlotte-Mecklenburg. He's the superintendent there. Not only is he a 20-year veteran in education, serving as teacher, principal, and administrator in Orange and Seminole counties in Florida before heading over to the West Coast for Tustin, California in 2001. He's an alumnus of the Broad Superintendent's Academy and has done an incredible amount of very innovative work on both using data for class size and staff allocation. So we'll look forward to hearing from him on that. Seated next to him is Mr. Terry Holliday, Kentucky Commissioner of Education. His state has gotten 27 year-round school programs and provided flexibility for schools, not just in integrating technology to improve their flexibility with class size and school time, but also allowed some interesting innovations with changing the school week and allowing different schedules there. He's also going to be able to talk to us a little bit about the ways that state policy can create an innovative environment. And finally, just to my right is Regis Shields. She's of Education Research Strategies, one of the nation's premier nonprofit education groups based in Watertown, Massachusetts. Regis works with districts that are exploring ways to actually implement these, usually in very tight budget situations, and restructure class time and size in core content areas. She believes strongly that the class structure should support academic achievement, particularly for students who are in secondary school retaking classes that they've previously not been successful in. So welcome to all of my panelists. I'm going to start first, shoot to you, Regis. As I mentioned, class size and in school time are fairly classic education reforms. So what is their place in the context? Is there room for innovation here, or has everything already been tried?
No, definitely everything hasn't been tried. So as I was thinking about my remarks, I was thinking what was the opposite of a perfect storm, because we have so many things happening right now. We're relooking at teacher evaluations, relooking at compensation, the core, Common Core, the assessments. We were just talking about all of the new thinking about brain research, the technology that we were talking about this morning, as well as this difficult revenue time. And when we think about all of these, if we think about these separately, I think what we'll do is we'll entrench things like school time, student time, class size. But if we think about how to use them all together, we really have the opportunity to revolutionize K-12. And I think that we are really only at the very beginning of thinking about that, because there are still a lot of obstacles and barriers. And even when I think about the name of our panel, student time, class size, it immediately draws to mind the 180 days, which I guess you've blown up in Kentucky to some extent, as well as the one teacher, one class. And it makes us think about tweaking around the edges or layering on to old structures without changing the old structures. And so, I just want to give a couple examples about how some of these new things actually impact student time and class size. So if we think about teacher evaluations and teacher compensation systems, there is, things are developing where we're really trying to tie the individual teacher to the individual student. And that, while student outcomes are really appropriate in teacher evaluations, the closer that link is, the further away you get from flexible groupings, teacher teams. And so I think it's important that we not design an evaluation system that dictates structure, but figure out how students learn best and invent an evaluation system that supports and facilitates it. One example, which I won't go into because I think Pete's going to talk about Ashley Park, which is a family model that they've implemented in Charlotte-Mecklenburg, which mixes students and teachers, and so it's very difficult to track the student to the teacher. So I'll leave that to Pete to talk about. The other thing, when I think about the Common Core and the assessments that are being developed around it, I'm concerned because they're very much set up in grade levels. And I'm hoping that we don't get stuck in grade levels. There's an interesting county out in Colorado, the Adams District 50, Adams County District 50, that have eliminated grade levels, and they use levels 1 through 10. Students are at different levels and they march up the levels. There's no such thing, and they mix during the day with teachers. There's no such thing as terms or semesters. And so that's a pretty innovative place. And you know, it's amazing what a word means, grade versus level, right? Because when we use the words grades, we very much get entrenched in our old way of thinking. And then when we think about instructional technology, I think that a lot of people have quoted disrupting class, which states that they think that by 2019, I'm very bad at pulling statistics from the top of my head, 50% of high school classes will be taught online, and that's only going to be revolutionary if we move past the notion of classrooms. And so there's some innovative models out there like Rocket Ship, which is out charter school out in California that has learning labs as part of the day where students master the skills and then do small group and classroom teaching with teachers around the more critical learning skills. And so I think that there's a ton of opportunities, but I still think we have a lot of structures in place that have grown up around the way we've structured education. We've got certification requirements that require teachers in the classrooms. We still have lots of class size restrictions. They may not be at the state level, but there are a lot in contracts and things of that nature. So,
thank you very much. I'd like to go now to Peter. Could you talk a little bit, following up on what she said, could you talk a little bit about your work in Charlotte, particularly in using the way you guys use data to figure out what class sizes are best for different groups and different schedules?
Sure. We've actually done a lot of work with ERS, and I think Karen Hawley Miles's book, The Strategic Schools, the best thing I've ever read about how you go about looking at this. And it is an introduction. In most cases, we get positions, we get dollars from states, however it might be, in a formulaic way. And I have a belief that formulas breed formulas. So if we get it given to us in a formula, then we obviously have to develop a formula to give it out to others. And the moment we start doing that, and we do it in a formulaic manner, we're taking away the individual challenges, needs, attributes, things that we need to do at each school. So the first thing we went back and did, working with some of our partners, is we started to look back at how are we using our resources. When we think of resources, it's time, people, and money. And we actually got as finite, working with others, as looking at what does it cost to put each class in our district, each section of a class, what is the cost? Because we said to ourselves, now wait a minute, we can really get some neat information out of this. The first thing we can do is we can look at where our most expensive classes are, because certainly if your resources are time, people, and money, and you've got a graduation rate that's around 75%, so clearly if that's the challenge you're working on, your kids who aren't on path to graduation must be where you're spending the most money, because that's where your greatest challenge is. Then you get the data back and you find out you're spending the most money to run German 5. And you're running German 5, which is an important class to offer, but then you look and you find out, my gosh, you're also spending the most to run Calc BC. And then you go a little farther and you find out that your creative writing elective for 12th graders. And by the time's all said and done, you look back and you see that Algebra 1A for kids that are on the road to not being successful is one of the least expensive classes that you're offering, and you say, now wait a minute. This is how we're approaching using our resources for the kids who have the greatest difficulty. We're actually putting the least amount of money towards educating those kids. Let's step back and talk about some of the strategic decisions that we're making about utilizing resources related to class size and how we're going about that. Then you also, if you use actual teacher salaries, which I strongly encourage you to do, not average teacher salaries, you also start asking yourself some questions about teacher effectiveness. Are these kids that are in the most challenged groups getting the first-year teachers just entering the field? Is that driving down the costs? So it can really trigger this whole series of questions you start to ask yourself, and then you come to the realization that one of the most powerful things you can do is flip on its head how you're doing master scheduling at the individual school level. Because what master scheduling truly is it's access to effectiveness. That's what it really is. It's the great keeper of effectiveness. But if you don't have data, you can't really drill home those points, and you can't have those difficult conversations with principals. It also gets into things like school size, and you realize, my gosh, it's costing us this much more to run a school, et cetera. So those are pieces you've got to look at. And then as you're looking at those pieces, then you've got to then apply that to the tough questions about teacher effectiveness, time, things of that nature. So that's the first piece I'd just like to comment on. Next piece I want to mention is you can't be so tied in to doing things that answer adult questions that you're not meeting the needs for children. The example I'll give you is, so we wanted to be able to figure out the value added score for teachers. So we said to folks, well, how can we tie a student back to a particular teacher? Well, they got to be with them X period of time, et cetera. So then I went and I visited this school called Ashley Park. And the principal at Ashley Park put in place the family model. Every Thursday they do a mini assessment. And on Friday they evaluate the data in team planning time, and then they regroup the kids for Monday. And you could have in a class with a teacher third graders, fourth graders, fifth graders, and you might have them with one teacher for 2 weeks and a different teacher for a week and then someone else, but they're in these families, as we call them. Now, it completely blew our whole value-added thing, and we had one person from the accountability shop say, we got to stop doing that because we can't track that back for teacher effectiveness. What in the world's the point of teacher effectiveness work if you're not talking about student effectiveness in accomplishing the goals? And what we found is, that's no different than we do at home with our families. When we think about our kids, you don't automatically just give the same thing to each child. Some progressing a little faster. Some aren't progressing as much. You spend some more time here. You spend a little different time there. Why aren't we making these flexible decisions on how we're grouping and how we're moving kids along the way? And when we started to do that, we found that it's really taken off. And the increases in student achievement have been phenomenal. We also tie to that the size of the groups, because we now will walk into some elementary school classrooms, which don't let our state auditing folks know, might have 40 kids in an elementary classroom sometimes. And then we might walk into another class that has 6 children. But we're meeting their individual needs by flexing the length of time, the size of classes, and we're constantly regrouping, and we're using formative data in ways that is really meaningful to customize to meet the needs of individual children.
Let's cut it off right there for the time being. We'll come
I'm
back to
done.
it. Sorry, and we'll go finally to you, Terry. Could you take us a little bit out a bit and talk a little bit about the state policies that will support this sort of innovation that you see, and the policies that might hinder it?
I think Pete began to hit on quite a few there. Let me take you to a national level. I just got back from China and Shanghai, and Shanghai, they make a conscious decision about the amount of face time that teachers have with kids. That about half the face time that U.S. teachers have with kids, 12 to 15 hours a week, but they trade off for class size. You know, they trade off about 40 kids in a class, but they specialize and are beginning to do a lot of what Pete was talking about, of the common formative and regrouping the kids. What was interesting to me, they've had professional learning communities in place since 1951. So sorry, Rick, before they were there before you. What we found at state level, a couple of things, was school day, school year, school week, giving a lot of flexibility there. We got 4-day weeks, we've got school year, we've got school round. But the key issue was the time and just locking into that one teacher, one kid thing. So allowing our site-based councils, they've had a lot of ability since CARA reform in the early 90s to basically regroup, redo schedules, make policy decisions at the school level to implement those things that help kids. However, we find that in most cases, even when you do allow the flexibility, you don't get the innovation, because if something's working for you, you really don't want to make a change. So we're finding very little waiver requests, very little flexibility out there. And second, even when you get the decision to the school level with site-based councils, they're still driven by adult decisions and not kid-centered decisions. So it's rare I find a school, and I've visited about 300 schools now in the last 2 years, it's rare I find a school that regroups the kids like Pete's talking about that Ashley Park does. And that essentially is where you need to go, is that decisions need to be driven by what the kids need. A couple of things that we are doing that we hope will drive this type of innovation is working with Stupsky Foundation and the Chiefs on an innovative next generation schools. We're trying to create for high school kids YouTube school. We're trying to create models like the School of One in NYC. We're trying to create High Tech High, those types of things. And we're finding that if we've got a good partnership with a 2-year or a 4-year, that we probably have a little bit more ability. It's going to result in, we're putting in place this year for the first time a mastery approach to board exam for high school kids. They could complete high school in 2 years or less, based on a competency model, a mastery model that wouldn't be tied to seat time. We've had seat time waivers in place for about 15 years now, and have quite a few of our schools and districts utilizing the seat time waiver. For me at the state level, things I've got to give flexibility to districts on is a one-page waiver is all it takes. 1 page. They said it was too much paperwork, so we cut the paperwork. 1 page. What you want to do, how you going to measure it. At the end of the year, let us know how it worked. You can get a waiver on seat time, class time. We did a snowbound project. They make up virtually. They don't have to attend school in person. Virtual makeup. How are you getting the mastery for the high school courses? Just write it down, send it in. We'll approve it. We've got to address the accountability model, because that's what drives all of the behaviors out there. So we've got to give flexibility to our schools and districts on the accountability if they're wanting to be innovative and to create a different approach to mastery or competency. If a kid can get admitted to college and be college or career ready after 2 years in high school, why should we stand in the way? But the adults will stand in the way, because, you know, every kid represents in Kentucky about $9,200. And high school principals and superintendents don't want to lose $9,200 per child. So it'll always come back to, are we making adult decisions or kid-focused decisions?
Thanks. Well, actually, I'll start a question for all three of you guys on one of those adult-focused decisions. How do you see the tightening budgets affecting how, is it making them more experimental, or are districts becoming less experimental because they're more worried?
I think there's a little bit of both. I think we have a unique opportunity as dollars start to come back into school districts. Are we going to automatically bring those dollars back as positions to lower class size, or are we going to do it in different ways? So we did some reductions in teaching positions. Sadly, this week we sent out 700 layoff notices for our teaching corps out of our district. Pretty dramatic cuts. But as we did the reductions, I had one of the principals tell me something that really hit home. He said, I didn't cut my academic facilitator who was coaching teachers, and we have fewer teachers for that academic coach to work with. And the teachers said they've never felt they got better professional development and support than this past year because of the reduction in the individuals, and that they prioritize that as a position to keep. So there's an opportunity to learn from some things. General dollars into class size reduction as a reform initiative is an incredibly expensive reform initiative. It is a lot less expensive to do some things like coaching and some other things that really, if you look at the research, have a much bigger bang for the buck. I think it was just last month, Center for American Progress put out a report on that class size piece that's pretty powerful.
I think from state level, what I'm pushing is what Secretary Duncan calls the new normal. We're having Secretary Duncan in this fall, and we're pushing a best practices type of approach. We're partnering with Florida, and we've got a website where we talk about best practices around process management for operational processes, because that's where you can save some dollars. So when some dollars start coming back in, the key is going to be making those strategic decisions. And I always found I needed a blueprint or a framework for strategic decisions. Where's my Palatine crowd? They in here? Great, yeah, we copied from you guys many years. We won the Baldrige in 8. When were y'all, like 2 or the Malcolm Baldrige Award? Okay, so having that process management focus to drive strategic decisions, that's one way you could do it with the Baldrige criteria. APQC, American Productivity Quality Council, has an excellent program called North Star that's a similar approach. You've got to have the data driven by strategic priorities that are kid-focused, and then you got to really map processes and make sure you've got the performance indicators to let you know how your processes are working. That's the state level's got to do it, because we're not, even if money starts coming back, state agency isn't going to get it. You know, they're going to drive it to the locals, and they're going to drive it to classrooms. So we'll never see the funding. We're 30% below where we were 2 years ago.
Yeah, so a recent article in Phi Delta Kappa quotes a superintendent as saying, innovation has almost ground to a halt. You can't push forward with new innovations without funding it, without the funding to see it through. And in my initial remarks, I said that lots of times we look at those structures and we just layer on top. And so innovations don't have to be expensive, but they are going to be expensive if we don't change the very expensive structures underneath, like class size, for example. Class size restrictions, compensation. We know we're spending, the previous panel was talking a lot about teacher compensation tied up in lanes and master's degrees and steps. But I think we need to look at compensation beyond teacher compensation. I'm working with a district where their secretaries are paid far more than teachers, and we can save about $8 million and potentially reduce class size. Not that class size reduction, we know the iffiness about class size reduction, but when we have class sizes of 35 with really poor performing kids.
it's interesting when you dig into the nitty-gritty of these school budgets. It's amazing what you find out people are spending money on. And I wanted to go back to what you were talking about of finding out that that AP course is the most expensive thing you have, even though it only has maybe 6 kids in it. And what immediately came to mind was, how do you approach the parents of those kids? And across the board, how do you approach the parents of kids who are used to certain privileges just by default, not necessarily on purpose, and get them on board with maybe having their kids in a little larger size?
Sure, good question. Well, we've done a lot of our equity-based reform initiatives in a stealth environment. And in doing that along the way, folks were saying, now when you're getting beat up in certain communities that you're not putting enough funds to help some of the kids who are furthest behind, why aren't you talking about how much more money you're spending? And we actually said, well, because that more money we're spending is coming from somewhere else, and to some extent, we don't want to draw attention for where we're drawing it from. In our elementary schools, we range from $4,200 per student to $10,200 per student. And we actually publish a school-by-school list of what we spend average per pupil, and we put that out. And we actually publish that at each individual school site. And, you know, 3 years ago, our community was bought into, we're all in this together. After 1 year of cuts, we were still bought in. Last year, we started to lose some folks. This year, we have really lost folks. And more than 2/3 of our students who are struggling below grade level are in less than 1/3 of our schools. And as we deal with those challenges in that 1/3 of our schools, some of the supports have actually come in resources that don't go to that other 2/3. So as we do that, we have found the only way to address that is small group conversations at the individual school sites with PTA leadership, school leadership team, and talk about the fact of what's changing in the world, and everyone's got to be career ready, career and college ready. You've got to actually engage them in one-on-one discussions in small groups. That's the only way to get that feeling done. Otherwise, this mass feeling of that's not fair comes in, and that's a tough conversation.
That happens a lot.
Yep.
I'll go to comment on the yeah, and I'm wondering about that because I'm also wondering, is this an area that you see a lot of the districts that you work with? Is this a stumbling place for a lot of them?
Yeah, I mean, I think one of the difficulties in districts is that there's this need through the various communities to treat everyone equally. It's 10% across the board cuts in central office. Class sizes across the board either raised or lowered, and when Pete was mentioning the AP, it's like access for AP at every school. Well, there is a very difficult community conversation about access. Access is a very expensive concept, whether it's AP, whether it's special education. You have those programs at every single school. It becomes very expensive because you have very small class sizes. So there's a balance between cost, there's a balance between access, and there is a balance between teacher quality, because when you're in a big district and you've got specialized programs and you're spreading them across all schools, you don't necessarily have the teacher effectiveness to support them. So you can put AP at all of your courses, but if you're not devoting some of that money to your 9th graders and building that pipeline for AP, it's not actually going to be very successful.
Sarah, I'd just add one thing. It gets interesting working at the state level with your governor and your members of the General Assembly. Like we had to come up with about 17% cuts in quite a few of our areas, and we went in and did it strategically rather than across the board. Politicians, across the board is much easier. That way you can say, well, everybody shared. But that's not strategic. That doesn't help you get at student learning. So we went strategically, and that's when you find the interesting paradoxes. For instance, there was a program we were giving a small rural district $100,000 a year, earmark money, for a little special program that was basically cake baking classes. And I cut that program. Well, it didn't take long till a phone call came. What do you mean cutting my program in this district? If I can't bring the money home to my district, what good am I? So you're going to have to be ready at the state level to deal with those types of issues too. And then it happens, you know, wonderful superintendent here, but if he doesn't get his share of the money, he's going to be upset about it too. So you got strategic issues at the state level as well as it plays out at the school and local level.
Well, let's throw it out to the audience. If you have a question, please raise your hand and stand, and you'll see one of our mic runners come around to you. Please give your name and also your organization number, your organization name. And if you would, keep your questions concise and make sure they are questions. We're trying to get through as many as we can. For our virtual audience, please type your question into the chat box and it will be referred up to us. So do we have anything else?
Well, I'll begin with email from our virtual audience here. What role can innovations at the state level, so this is probably largely a good question to start with Terry if we can, like seat time waivers play in increasing graduation rates or raising reading and math scores? Should I ask that again? Did that?
Okay.
I feel like I interrupted the question.
Yeah, no, I think absolutely the seat time waiver, seat time and credits are our two biggest barriers to innovation in high schools, I think. Seat time has very little, that's just you got to spend your time and hope for an early parole, I guess. But with seat time, if we give the flexibility to the seat time, we got like a basic requirement of 1,062 hours a year, but no real requirement for high school credits, and anybody can request a waiver of that if they can, and they can do a mastery-based approach. Where it's key is in alternative programs, especially things like credit recovery, getting kids back, the drop-back enters to get them back in. And so with Algebra 1, you say, well, you failed it this year, and so we're going to teach it longer and louder next year, right? So here's another way. Here's another way. And there's no seat time requirement for you here. And here's the carrot for the kid. You come in, we'll help you. We'll have all kinds of ways. We'll do it game-based. We'll do it here in this 3 to 8 program. And so the more innovative you can get around that, the more kids you're going to save, which means you're going to lower your incarceration rate in all states, which means you'll lower the impact on your state budget.
Thanks. Heather? Ian?
Bill, Jobs for the Future, former superintendent here in Illinois. I'd ask Dr. Gorman, Pete, and Dr. Holliday, how do you balance your equity issues when you look at the retrenchment of the budgets? And how do you ensure, given the diversity, particularly in Charlotte-Mecklenburg and in Kentucky, that we're not back where we were 20 years ago?
The first thing we've done, and I think many school districts are taking an approach like this, is we're just not doing that across the board piece. We are truly not doing that, and we're looking at proficiency levels and growth numbers and things such as that as we look at support for areas and where we're doing reductions. And we're making exceptions at particular schools. And that's what's brought us some of the pushback from some of our other schools when they're saying, now wait a minute, now you've kept this program or this opportunity for access at this particular school and not cut it and cut it here. So we have done it in a way that requires a lot more discussion and debate. And the thing that I think has helped us the most with it is our board has chosen to engage in thoughtful discussion about it instead of hurling insults and declarative statements. But they've actually engaged in discussion about it. And I think that has set a tone for things and that they've not been lured into some of that. There's a huge piece there when it comes to those equity pieces related to how the board approaches it.
So we're moving forward with a $40 million effort of major education reform. We're getting ready to submit to Secretary Duncan an accountability model that replaces AYP. At the same time, we had to cut over $200 million in state budgets, and I think Pete's exactly right. We had to make strategic decisions. We can't go backwards. So Common Core is in place. We start teaching it this fall. New assessments 3.8, high school end of course in place next spring. New accountability model, new teacher effectiveness, new principal effectiveness models that drive the types of strategic decisions we want districts to make. Now, does that come easy? Oh my goodness, no. I had dark hair before I started this job 2 years ago. But it is the right thing to do, strategic decisions based on outcomes that you want for kids.
And do we have an?
Okay. Yeah, okay. Yeah, Jim Applegate, Lumina Foundation. Hi, Terry. Terry, you mentioned some of the programs that you're doing and how it's working best in some places where you're getting partnerships from 2-year and 4-year higher ed. I think as we think about these resource issues, we're sort of siloed in that as well as we are in everything else. I mean, higher ed is taking cuts, K-12 is, but so I'm interested in how we work together with our resources to be most effective for our students. So I don't know if you could elaborate a little more on how you're seeing that play out and be helpful to you in all the innovations that you're launching there in Kentucky.
It's extremely helpful to be aligned. The Council on Post-Secondary Education in Kentucky is, we're very close partners. We meet quite often, almost once a week, to make sure strategically we're going all in the same direction. Like we had to cut professional development dollars a good bit, but Council on Post-Secondary Education picked up with their title money to drive strategically, here are the only grants we're going to award to local universities that you're providing PD to support preparing K-12 teachers and existing teachers in implementation of Common Core standards. So again, quite a few favorite programs got cut in the universities and there was some pushback, but the decisions were made strategically that we were driving a reform agenda and we had to use our dollars wisely at higher ed and K-12 to support each other.
I just want to share kind of a general comment, something that we've done in Charlotte. We've kind of gone out on, we've talked about doing more with less and doing less with less. This year with our budget process, we told folks we're going to do less with less. Because at some point in time, you just got to draw the line in the sand and make sure you're telling people 100% truthful, because we're just not doing as much next year as we've been doing. And the other piece is, at some point in time, your team, your staff can get so fatigued that if they don't view that you are speaking the truth to those with power, those folks passing on the dollars, that you are turning a blind eye to them for what they've been going through. So that's a tough point, though, when you pick, when is the moment when you can say, we're not going to do more with less? Because are you really giving them a license to under-deliver compared to the previous year? It's a tightrope you walk with these situations.
Sarah, can I build on that?
Let's
No.
go to one more
Okay.
question and we'll go
Okay.
back to it. Where?
We have another question here from Mrs. T's World from the virtual audience. Deb Torson wants to know what issues surround student mobility between districts when some have been innovative and flexible and others remain traditional.
We'll actually go straight to you on that, since you've worked with more districts.
Well, I don't know if I have an answer for that one. I mean,
I'm hopeful with the Common Core
yeah.
that it will be an area that will help bring us together more for that. But it is a challenge then. So here we're doing all this multi-age grouping and moving folks around. And when they leave us at this particular school and move to a different district and they get there and they look and say, 12 years old, 6th grade, let's plug them in. And that's where that piece of things like, I know I'm now talking more high school, seat time Carnegie units, they must be here, they got to exactly fit, but it carries over to the other level. But I think that's that piece where we got to customize to meet the needs of where children are. So it really gets down to the point of doing something that we're doing, personal education plans for all students who are behind on grade level, below grade level, for what are we doing to customize. And gosh, they're a lot of work, but
Yeah. Statewide, we've got an individual learning plan for each kid, still not well used, but that is eventually the solution. I'd push back on the question a little bit. The big issue is high schools. We got trimesters, we got 4x4, we got 8x8. I mean, you name it, we got it in high schools. And so, poor kid who transfers a lot of mobility, especially with Army military bases. We've got two big ones, Fort Knox, Fort Campbell. The pushback is the receiving school needs to figure out a mastery approach and to assess those kids when they first come in and then put them in the appropriate placement. So I would say that it's more our adult problems, and we're making those adult decisions still to the detriment of the kids.
Well, if I can ask you a follow-up on that, can class size play a role in that? Have you seen any schools or districts that use smaller class sizes to help students who seem to be in highly mobile?
Well, one of the things that I think I wanted to comment on, make that ties all of this together is where the decisions are being made. Is it being made at the state? Is it being made at the district? Or is it being made at the school? And so when we talk about mobility, in large districts, you have a lot of mobility across schools. And I think that and it goes back to the equity question that was asked earlier. I've been working with a number of districts about moving to a weighted student funding system where the dollars follow the students based on student need. And that's actually a really wonderful way to move away from staff-based budgeting in times of budget problems, because that really does create an equity. But that also can be accompanied with school empowerment. And when you give schools the flexibility, and you have to give them the flexibility around their schedules, around their class sizes, that's where you see the innovation at the individual school level, where they are able to make decisions based on their instructional model and based on their student needs as well as their teacher capacity. Because they may not have you may extend the day in math as a district, decision, let's say. But if you as an individual school don't have that math capacity, that is not going to be a wise decision for your individual school.
Great. Well, we've got time for maybe one or two quick questions. And
We do have another one from the virtual audience. I'd like to take
Okay.
one from the live if there's any questions in the room right away.
Okay. Why
This one is from Cy. Says, what are some innovative flexible groupings and schedules for primary grades, considering meeting the needs of ELL and students getting used to movement?
Yeah, we haven't spoken much on ELL, and I wonder if you could touch on what role language acquisition will have in how you're scheduling the day.
well, we're doing everything from, we have a program, SIFE, Students with Interrupted Formal Education, where what do you do when you get the child who comes and they enroll in school and they're 10 and they've never been in school a day in their life? I think it's going to involve customizing to meet those particular needs, and that's where we've got to look at a resource allocation that's different, and the dollars need to follow those students. So we fund those kids differently, well above what the state gives us, because we have to do that. So that's an individual district level decision that I think needs to be made. And then what we're finding is a lot of our principals are making even more aggressive decisions to allocate resources in those areas.
This is one of the areas where I think it'll really differ state by state, because states do have some requirements here that really hamstring how schools use their money. And so dual certification, inclusion and having dual certification is really one way to be very, very flexible at it. And so using your professional development dollars to dual certify your teachers, because in many instances there's a lot of state requirements about who can teach ELL. And I think that a great example is at the elementary school level is in St. Paul, which has, I think, maybe about 60% ELL students, where it's a very a strong push-in model as opposed to a pull-out model.
And I'd like to give you the last word, Mr. Holliday. And Could you talk a little bit about how you see technology moving this forward in the short term, in the next year or two? Do we really have the infrastructure to have these giant classes for distance learning, or how do you see it playing out?
Sure, we do, even in a rural state like Kentucky, we do our annual technology survey and find very strong access, and we've got a few spots without the broadband we need, but I think we're only limited by our imagination. I think the broadband's going to come. I think we got iPods, iPads, we've got every classroom imaginable out there. I think the playlist is the key, though. Like School of One, the playlist for the kids and the instructional management system is the key, because a teacher class size is differentiation. If you can't differentiate for the kids, that's why you want a smaller class size. But if you got 50 to 100 in a class, how do you differentiate for the kids? So you need a technology management system that creates the playlist for the kids, and it's a blended approach rather than a direct online approach. So you need the kids rotating stations to some direct, some online, some game-based, some other digital content. So I think the playlist, like you guys get your Amazon or your iPod playlist, that's what kids need every day when they enter school, and that'll help all of our kids. And I think the U.S. can certainly lead in that respect.
Well, I think we're going to leave it there. Let's thank our panelists very much for coming on in.